Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. I hope everybody feels refreshed after lunch. Can we just say a massive thank you to Cognisoft, who are our human fuel sponsors. You might have noticed I am now here. So I just want to say a massive thank you to Dan for stepping in at the last minute this morning because I was held up. So thanks very much, Dan. This afternoon's session 3, is all about stigma, challenging society's abnorms. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Daniel Derbyshire, and our panellists, Liz Sewell, Peter Schofield, William Britton, and Tim Jeffery.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon now. So thank you very much for the invite to be here. Thank you to the AIEP for the invite. Thank you all for attending. It was a great morning, so hopefully we can keep it up with a great afternoon. Let's see how we do, though. So it was exactly 1 year ago today that I gave a live learn lunch for the AIEP on a similar topic to this, and that's kind of what led to my being here today. I'm going to speak about unconscious bias, in particular towards disabled people, and more so from the employer side, and so kind of the other side of the puzzle to what a lot of you are more potentially dealing with in your day-to-day work. But from a conversation earlier, it's become clear that there's kind of an interplay in the sense that if people expect to be discriminated against, then that can kind of put up a barrier from the employee side as well, and so addressing stigma, unconscious bias, all this kind of thing is important from kind of both sides, we think. Just a couple of other small bits before I start properly. Some of you may have seen on Channel 4 News last night about a rise in hate crimes towards disabled people, so this is kind of a pertinent time to be doing this. They also say you shouldn't talk about politics, but clearly at this moment in time it's kind of an issue with disabled people and employment, and it's something that the government is pushing hard on, and so knowing how we can kind of address employer-side concerns around that will make it easier to help more disabled people into meaningful, good work. And of course, we're coming out of a mass disabling event, COVID, still 3 years down the line. It is a concern, and so that's another kind of aspect of the situation we find ourselves in today with respect to disabled people in the world of work. So as it says, my name is Daniel Derbyshire, and the research I'm going to present was funded by the European Regional Development Fund. I need to say that, so. Having the same kind of problem. There we go. So when we think about disabled people, there are kind of two primary models for thinking about disabled people. The older, more traditional model is the medical model, where we think about people and their impairments. The ways in which people are disabled are things like they can't see, they can't hear, they can't work, etc. And more so now, emerging from kind of the late 90s onwards, but becoming especially prominent over the last kind of 10, 15, 20 years, is the social model of disability, in which we think about people being disabled by barriers imposed by society. So people aren't disabled because they can't walk, they're disabled because a building is designed badly. And so it's about the way in which we design society, from our physical infrastructure, buildings, through to interview processes, job application forms, all these kind of different things. And so it's about thinking about how we can design society in a more inclusive way for disabled people in that sense. So when we think about unconscious bias, we talk about it as like a kind of an umbrella, but actually kind of encompasses quite a few different phenomena that psychologists have studied over the past, again, 10, 15, 20 plus years. One of which is confirmation bias. You can see this little cartoon sums it up really. Makes no difference what I say, you've already decided that I'm guilty. Gasps, the witch can read minds. And so it's a tendency to focus on things that we hear or see, which confirm our pre-existing beliefs. So we seek out information that kind of confirms and conforms to what we already know. I think we see this a lot in our increasingly polarized politics, and I think that it kind of is at play here as well. When we think about disabled people, in an employment context, there's a tendency to focus on, for example, job gaps in CVs and things like that, as opposed to thinking about the job experience and things like that. The other one, which is again possibly even more important with respect to disabled people, is that people have been shown to have preferences for people who are more similar to themselves. This operates across a very broad range of characteristics, from really important salient ones like gender, race, disability, protected characteristics more broadly under the Equality Act, but also even down to trivial things like hair colour, eye colour, what football team you support, things like that. And so people are shown to have what we call an affinity bias as well. And this is one of the kind of drivers of unconscious bias. This is probably one of the most important ones when we're thinking about disabled people. So just to give us a little introduction and talk about why we think about unconscious bias. Basically, our brains are kind of like computers, but they have very limited computing power in a sense. And so we're always looking for shortcuts, ways in which we can more quickly get to where we want to get to. And there's a nice little example which we can think about, which is trying to do multiplication, basically. So if you ask someone what 19 times 51 is, then a lot of people can very quickly say, oh, well, it's about 20 times 50, so it's about 1,000. Now, you get to an answer pretty quickly, but at a loss of accuracy. So you've made a quick judgment, but actually it's not a very accurate judgment. And that's kind of where the idea comes in, that when we're thinking fast instead of thinking slow, that we make quicker judgments, yes, which sometimes, okay, we feel pressure that we need to do, but actually there's a loss of accuracy there, and so there may be some misjudgment comes in there. And so it takes time or a calculator to get to the right answer, which, in case anyone's wondering, is 969. And so in challenging unconscious bias, one of the main things that we need to do is take time to kind of consider our judgments and think about whether they're rooted in reality or whether they're kind of based on preconceptions, shortcuts, these kind of things. Now, like I said, I'm going to be talking more from the employer side, but this maybe speaks to some of the concerns that you hear from some of your clients, for example. And this is based on another paper. I'll put the link there. I can share it with people if people are really interested. But here are some of the employer concerns, and basically this paper that I've spoken about here goes into why all of these are basically misconceptions, why most of these things are actually wrong. So employers worry that their jobs just aren't attractive to disabled people for various reasons. They worry that disabled applicants are going to have less qualifications. They worry that the selection process is not going to be suitable for disabled people, which circles back to what I was saying about the way in which we design these things. We need to make sure that our selection processes, application forms, etc., are inclusive. Employers worry about the cost of making reasonable adjustments, despite the fact that on average a reasonable adjustment costs £75, and that there is support available through the Access to Work scheme when there are the need for more expensive adjustments. People in the Department for Work and Pensions that I've kind of done events with before have referred to Access to Work as the government's best kept secret, because a lot of employers just don't know about it. And so raising awareness of the ability of and availability of that kind of support can go a long way to kind of helping employers get over those concerns they have about needing to make adjustments. For example, again, only 8% of disabled people use a wheelchair, but that's kind of the stereotypical view that comes to mind when you mention a disabled person. And so employers suddenly think, oh, I'm going to have to install ramps and a lift and all these kind of things into my building. But actually, it could just be that you need to get a special keyboard or a special chair. And again, the average reasonable adjustment is very, very cheap, actually less than £100. They also worry about the impact that their disabled employees are going to have on their co-workers. If I can just try and go back a slide. So they worry that disabled people are somehow going to create discohesion, or whatever you want to call it, within the workforce, partly maybe because of the stigma that's associated with that and how it creates difficult conversations in the workplace that people are afraid to have. They're worried, and it's linked to the idea about the qualifications. They're worried that disabled workers are going to have lower job performance, and they worry about occupational health and safety problems being kind of higher risk of accidents and things like this. Now again, like I say, most of these things are misconceptions, especially in most cases. Of course, there may be specific cases where there are specific concerns, but in the majority of cases, these are stereotypes and they're misperceptions. And so challenging these kind of things and creating a more inclusive environment amongst employers then creates a better mindset amongst potential employees that they're going to get a fair hearing, basically, which is kind of all we want for anyone, right? So now I'm going to talk specifically about some of the research that I've done. This is joint work with a couple of colleagues at Exeter and another colleague from Disability Cornwall, which is a disabled people's organisation based in Cornwall. And it's about the importance of the disability representation in the workplace. And I'll speak to kind of why we call it that. So what we did with here was we used what's known as colloquially as an unconscious bias test. If I can get it to move forward, there we go. It's called the implicit association test. It was developed in Harvard, late 90s, but really came to prominence in the 2000s, basically. And like I say, it's widely used. There are different versions. I focus, of course, on the disability version. That's what I'm going to kind of talk to today. But basically, there are different versions across all these kind of characteristics that I spoke about, and many others as well. There's more versions being developed all the time. So, for example, a transgender version was introduced in 2020, so about 3 years ago. And again, if anyone saw the Prime Minister speak last night, we'll realise why that's an important aspect for us to talk about and think about. So we often use this test with specialist populations such as doctors, the police, again, in specific contexts. So in the context of doctors, it's often to do with transgender and or disabled people. With the police, they tend to use the race version, for example. And in an employment context, it's kind of all of them. But again, that's where the gender one comes in a lot as well, for example. So the way it works is that people are sat at a computer. Sorry, before I mention how it works, I'll just say the Equality and Human Rights Commission did a report on unconscious bias training in 2018 and evidence for whether it's effective or not. And they said that almost all unconscious bias training courses will feature this test. They'll get people to do this test as part of that, and that it's one of the things that they recommend that organisations use this test, followed by a debrief session, which most online versions include, to increase awareness, which is one of the main things that this test does, and to measure any changes over time. So this isn't going to suddenly reduce people's bias, but what it does do is it makes them more aware, and that's kind of one of the key things in terms of addressing unconscious bias, is just to be aware of them and start to have those conversations and address where those perceptions come from and to break down those kind of stereotypes and misperceptions that I just mentioned previously. So again, to go back to how it works, the way it works is people sat at a screen and pictures or words will pop up on the screen. So you can see here you've got a picture of a person walking. It could be a picture of someone on crutches or someone in a wheelchair, or it could be words like delightful, joyful, detest, hate, things like that. So either good or bad words, and pictures of either able-bodied or disabled people. And people are asked to categorise them. So you can see here that we need to put bad words or pictures of disabled people to the right, good words, pictures of non-disabled people to the left. And people do this for 40 times, different words pop up, different pictures. And the idea is that you're supposed to do it as quickly as possible. So it's a reaction time-based test, because it's getting at that, what I was talking about before, that thinking fast. It's about those implicit automatic associations that people have in their brains, and about how we can break those down. So if I go on to the next slide, there you can see, this is the way I just described it. And then what happens is, once they've done this, like I say, 40 times, it switches round. So then they're told to put good and disabled people, good words and disabled people pictures together, and bad words and non-disabled people pictures together. And what happens is, in general, this takes people longer. They're slower to do this because it kind of goes against their automatic associations. This takes more thought, basically, because it goes against what people instinctively associate disability as being a bad thing and non-disability as being a good thing. And so people, like I say, people are generally slower in this case. And then we measure the difference in how quickly they do this versus how quickly they do the other part. The bigger that difference is said to be the measure of unconscious bias. So the bigger that difference between being able to do this and being able to do the more instinctive version, the more unconscious bias is said to be there. So I'm just going to quickly just show you the results of what we found. We were interested in whether people who are involved in hiring decisions, whether they have lower levels of unconscious bias, basically, towards disabled people. You can see that on the left, once you finish one of these tests, it'll kind of put you into one of 7 possible categories. People have no automatic preference, which is kind of like the middle, no bias. then you can either be biased towards or against disabled people at 3 different levels: slight, moderate, and strong. You can see just by eyeballing that most people, 2/3 of the people in our sample, showed either a moderate or a strong implicit bias towards disabled people. And this is in line with other studies that have been done. There's the group that came up with the test from Harvard, they've got an online version and they make all that data publicly available. And so we can see that over 500,000 people have done this test and the results are very similar. At least 2/3 of people are showing a strong or moderate automatic association against disabled people. You can also see just by eyeballing the colours on the bars, the blue and the orange, that there really isn't much difference between people who are and aren't involved in hiring decisions. Our thought was that the people involved in hiring decisions maybe get more training. They're the ones responsible for ensuring compliance with the Equality Act, for example, and so maybe they're in some ways better, but it didn't pan out. The other thing we were interested in is whether the size of firm makes a difference, whether people work for small, medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, or large companies, because again, we thought large companies, they've got bigger budgets for training and development of staff, etc. But again, just by eyeballing, you can see that there really isn't much difference. Pretty much equal numbers have got strong or moderate implicit bias towards disabled people, whether they work for small or large companies. So this idea of being involved in hiring decisions, or working for big or small companies doesn't really make any difference from the research that we found. So that was kind of just a quick whistle-stop tour. I'm going to now open it up so that we can hear from the wonderful panel that the AIEP have put together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'd like to introduce Pat Russell, the chair of the AIEP board. Our next section is Mastermind. So our first panellist is Liz.
Can you see?
I can't see you.
Okay, so welcome everybody to Mastermind. I bet you were wondering what the chair was for. I hope you can hear me okay. So, Liz, your full name, please.
Liz Sewell.
And your role? I'm director of Belina Grow, and we support women get back to work. And your specialist subject for today?
Single parents.
Well done. Right. If I can work this, your time starts now. Liz, what are some of the common misconceptions or stereotypes that exist around lone parents, and how can we challenge and overcome these biases to promote inclusivity in the workplace?
So if people were to close their eyes and imagine a lone parent, I wonder if they would imagine a 39-year-old with one child who was likely to be working 75% of lone parents' work. Or if they were thinking about a lone father. Lone fathers tend to be older, their children tend to be older, they tend to have worked before. So lone parents aren't one single thing. And I think what we hope lone parents, what we encourage lone parents to do when they're going for jobs is to look in some senses in the same way as we were talking earlier about ambivalence, to look at the way that the positives of what they can offer, what you can offer as a mum. And if you're a single parent, you've been doing everything. So encourage people to build that motivation and confidence. At an interview, we would probably not encourage people to talk about the fact that they were lone parents, because there can be discrimination. There's discrimination against anybody who's looking after children. And if you're a lone parent, that comes in harder. So we would again ask people to focus on what they can do, what they've got to offer. And I think from an employer's point of view, the best thing that they can do is to be open to the best talent.
Your next question, Liz. Can you think of any successful strategies or examples that you or your team have used to support somebody with particular complex barriers in their journey to work?
So our programme, we work with people in groups, and one of the if you look at lone parents, single parents, what they say is there's a flip side to the coin. One of the things that is a benefit of being a single parent is your independence, is your right to do what you want to do. And a lot of people may have, come out of a relationship where that wasn't possible. But the other side of that is isolation. People feel very isolated. And so our programme, what we do is we do a lot of work in groups, and we get people to understand that they are not alone and that there are other people in similar situations. And we work through how they can get to those practical solutions. So I think it's about sort of helping people feel they're part of a community and that there are people that can support them.
That sounds really good. So could you give us a real life success story?
So I'm going to suggest you all look a bit later at page 7 of your brochures, because there's a lovely picture of Mercedes Grant, who works for our team. And when she came to the GROW programme, because everybody who works for us has been through the programme, when she came, she was completely ambivalent. She came for the biscuits because she said, I'll get a cup of tea and a biscuit and I'll see what it's like. But when she found out about the opportunities, she'd be better off, that she could work part-time, and eventually she developed that confidence, and now she builds other people's confidence. And I think you can just, if you look at that picture of her on that page, you'll see how it's building that confidence, not just the practical issues, it's the confidence that helps people move forward.
Excellent. And it seems like a resonance there. And one more question I think we've got time for. You mentioned employers in answer to your first question. How can you encourage employers to adopt more inclusive hiring practices and create supportive working environments?
So one of the big things we're trying to focus on at the moment is term time working. There's a lot of different sorts of flexible working out there, but for people who are bringing up children on their own, term time working would make a really big difference. And Amazon this year took that on, and we're hoping that lots of other employers will see this as a benefit, because they need a broader pool of people to work with, and single parents have so much to offer. So it's good for them as well as good for the single parent.
So as we know, it's party conference season at the moment. So if you could speak to any of the political parties, what policy changes or legislative initiatives do you believe would be most beneficial in improving employment opportunities for single parents?
So I think the 2 magic bullets are childcare and flexible working. And what's great is that the political parties are in a bidding war on childcare at the moment. So let's hope that that continues and they both put that in. We need to have the practicalities of that in place as well, but we've got the principle there. And then I think in terms of flexible working, just allowing people that opportunity from the beginning, which is coming in next year.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Liz. Next in the hot seat, we have Tim Jeffery from the Growth Company, whose specialist subject is refugees.
Right, so Tim, what challenges do individuals, people, refugees typically face in finding and maintaining work?
So really, typically, a refugee who's arrived in the UK, fled from another country, will kind of face a really wide range of challenges all at the same time, all of which are extremely disorientating in terms of taking people out of an area where they feel comfortable and know into totally different worlds. Just to run through some of those, ESOL, English language, is a really significant challenge, and the patchy availability of that. And also helping people get the language skills, not just to participate in society, but also in the workplace. That's really difficult. Most refugees will often have lots of complex barriers completely outside of the world of employability, but will be affecting their ability to look for work. So that could involve housing, could involve education for their kids. It could involve, likely to involve health, and all of that's going to be going on at the same time. So often looking for a job could be one of the final steps that a refugee that's arrived in the UK will look at. And also just, I guess, a lack of kind of cultural awareness or understanding of the UK labour market could be really key. On a project which we run called United for Ukraine, which is designed to support Ukrainian refugees in the UK, we have Ukrainian-speaking support workers that are there to kind of help people, guide people through the recruitment process. And some of the questions that we get are often really simple, but so things like, what is a cover letter, and what does pro rata mean, and all these tiny little things that actually is really disorientating for a refugee trying to apply for a job. And a lot of this stuff we think is just implicit knowledge that they don't have. And lastly, it can be just the system itself, going to a job centre appointment, being referred to a programme. What are all these things? It's just, compounded barriers that a refugee is likely to face regardless of where they've come from.
Gosh, that's not easy. I'm told my microphone wasn't working, so hopefully you can hear me a bit better this time. So thinking about some of the people that you and your team have helped, can you think of an example where a particular strategy has helped, something that colleagues here in the room might be able to employ if they have a refugee turn up on their programme?
Yeah, there's two things, I guess, which I think have been most successful in the work that we've done, particularly with Ukrainian refugees, but I think is transferable to refugees from all backgrounds. The first, I think, is helping people build their social networks, increase their social capital. If you think you arrive in the UK, you're a refugee, you might have come in through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, you're living with a family in maybe a remote area, you don't know anybody, or you've recently came out of a bridging hotel, or you're likely to have no kind of real social capital or social networks to speak of. We know that a lot of the time, people find jobs through connections, through friends, through networks, through former colleagues and things like that. Refugees are likely to have none of that. So really doing what we can to empower people to just grow their social networks, to meet new people, to build that social capital in their communities is, I think, the first step. And that's got nothing to do with looking for a job, but most of the time it can lead to that connection or that relationship that further down the line can lead to employment. And the next, I think, is peer support. So helping people link in with other refugees or other people that have been in a similar circumstance, that are maybe a bit further on the journey, people that they can talk to in their own language, relate to, people who they can get advice and guidance and information from. A lot of that happens kind of naturally, organically in communities of refugees, but signposting and helping people find those has been worked very well for us on United for Ukraine, working with organisations like the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain and things like that. So it's almost kind of not starting even thinking about looking for work, but helping people build social connections and social capital. Is that
Thanks, Tim. I was expecting you to say I've started, so I'll finish then. Right, next we have Peter Schofield from G4S with a specialist subject of ex-offenders.
Right, Pete. So, short question. What are your top 3 pieces of advice when supporting ex-offender participants on a programme?
First and foremost, it's got to be seeing the person, not the offence. quite often it's the offence or the mistake is the catalyst for change. And that's what often doesn't get seen. They are this or they are that with that label because of the offence. But actually, if you see the person, we can sell that person before we start touching on the offence. Secondly, and I've brought notes, and it's not because I'm cheating, it's because like some people in the room, and it turns out it's not just me, I'll eat this 5 minutes talking because I'm good at that. Secondly, it's understanding restrictions. Many people who have experienced custody will have licence conditions or those that are managed under MAPA restrictions. It's understanding those as an advisor, working with that person so we can find them appropriate employment, but as well, it's ensuring that they understand those restrictions as well so they don't trip themselves up and start applying for inappropriate employment, which can open a whole can of worms. And this is something that Roxy touched on earlier. It's something big advocate of, is that positive language we focus often on, and certainly with the sort of the cohorts we're talking about in this section, what they can't do this, can't do that, can't. Actually, what can they do? Let's focus on the I can. And people who've experienced custody actually can do a hell of a lot of stuff, and it's pulling that out and explaining that and getting them to understand that as well as employers.
Great, thank you. So what challenges do individuals who are ex-offenders typically face in finding and maintaining work once they're in a role?
I think the biggest one, and it certainly ties into what Dr. Daniel was talking about earlier, is perception or the unconscious bias. And that's right across the board. That's employer perception of what if I employ this person, will they commit an offence? Will they be unreliable because they'll be locked up in prison? It's their own perception of, I'm not good enough, I won't get a job because I've got a criminal offence. It's their perception of the employer won't want me because I've got an offence. It's the perception of what if a colleague finds out, or what if somebody else finds out what I've done. So perception, both self and internal perceptions are a big one. Disclosure and spent convictions are a huge thing. So the who, what, when, where, why and how of disclosure, fundamentally, if you're supporting somebody to apply for a job, when do we disclose, how do we disclose? And that is a whole other few hours that I could spend talking about that. But understanding spent convictions, if we think of convictions as points on your licence after a certain amount of time, you don't have to tell your insurance company. Similar with convictions, it's very different than driving offences and points on your licence. But if we can understand if a conviction is spent and that the participant understands that, they won't necessarily have to disclose it to that employer. So that might be a barrier that's stopping them applying for work because they don't want to have to talk about their offence or relive certain things. So if it's spent, we don't have to talk about that. And finally, it's finding appropriate and understanding employers. People with licence conditions, people who have experienced custody, will potentially have other appointments that they need to meet, whether that's probation, sometimes police, it could be substance misuse services, it could be mental health services. An employer that understands that they may have other appointments and can be flexible and help to support that, which will all fundamentally help them to reduce reoffending and not go back to prison, that's key, I think.
Excellent. And finally, can you think of, give us an example of a strategy or something that you've done or one of your team has been involved in to actually help an individual?
I think fundamentally it's understanding. I talked about employers and the tide is changing. There's a lot of now proactive employers, and the Ban the Box campaign, for those of you, you can go and Google that and understand that a bit more. Basically, that's a long list of employers, most of them big national companies that are proactively supporting people who've experienced custody. And they are taking away from the application forms the box that says, do you have an offence, to tick it. It's up to the person to disclose it, and the law gives them the right to do that. So it's up to them to choose when to disclose that to the employer, not necessarily the employer asking for it at point of application.
Just sneak one in. I've started, so I'll finish. Yes, I got to say it. Can you just very quickly, obviously naming no names, but just give a little case study very quickly, somebody that you know has been helped through your programme?
Not necessarily through our programme, but locally to us in the Northwest, we've got HMP Lancaster Farms. They've got an employer engagement team that are absolutely fantastic. And prisons are getting much smarter and much better at understanding supporting people through the gate into employment. They're starting to understand labour markets and LMI and all that sort of stuff. So Lancaster Farms are really, really switched on with that. They've got a company called Flavour Fresh Salads, and what they're doing is supporting people. They go into the prison, they'll explain who they are and what they do. They'll then offer interviews to those people that are interested prior to release, job offer, and then upon release, they'll meet them, take them to the place of employment. If they need it, they will support them with accommodation within the first few months of getting them settled. And if they move, fundamentally, they take them out of the area that they were offending in, put them in a new area, and support them to understand that area and get to know that area. So that's one really good one that I've been looking at recently.
Okay, our last participant is William Britton from AutonoMe, whose specialist subject is neurodiversity.
Just when you thought you were going to get away with it, Will. And the light comes on. Okay, so your first question, Will, is could you tell us if there are any innovative or emerging technologies and tools and platforms that can support people with neurodiverse conditions?
Yeah, so we've developed what we kind of call a blended model of support. So kind of similar to the work coach model, we know that the work coach model is really effective of getting people up into employment. But as a long-term solution, it's very difficult to source work coaches, and also for someone that's got a learning disability or neurodiverse, they may not want a work coach kind of standing over them. They may want to have, they may not want to disclose or only disclose to certain people in the team. So maybe a work coach standing over them will certainly, disclose for them. So what we've kind of been able to do is develop this kind of blended model. So we've taken the idea of providing this kind of support through a lot of video content that we provide through an app. So the person downloads the app, and we have development coordinators. And the development coordinator is someone that gets to know the individual and then gets to understand the kind of obstacles that they're facing in their journey towards sustainable employment. And then we basically develop strategies and deliver those strategies through the app. So the perfect example probably is something like someone starts their job role, Joe, can you shadow Jill for 2 weeks and pick up that job role? But they've never heard of the term shadowing before. They don't know what it is. They've never done it before. And instead of disclosing to their kind of manager, it just causes anxiety. So what we would do is we would create a video that explains what shadowing is. They access that through their mobile device. They can watch that in the evening on the job. And they have access to that, and they also self-assess their understanding of it and how they're progressing with it. And I think the point is it's a blank slate. So the idea is we're just going up to someone and saying, what is the obstacle that you have in your employment? And then we'll create the solution for it. And I think the opportunity in technology is the scalability of it that you don't have with the job coach. So we're able to provide the support straight away. We're able to provide the support at 2 a.m. and in a normal kind of 9 to 5 day. And we can do it with a lot less people. So instead of that one-to-one job coach approach, our frontline staff support about 150 people per individual. So in regards of having a really scalable program that stays in for the duration of their employment, I think that's the opportunity, and that's the kind of interesting thing.
Wow, that sounds fascinating to a dinosaur like me. I still like a pen and paper, but what do I know? So that all sounds great. What can we do? In fact, what do you do to involve employers and the business community more sort of advocating for neurodiverse individuals?
Yeah, so we work with a variety of employers with, thousands of staff in one, and then literally, someone that just owns a coffee shop and has, 4 or 5 staff. So it's like a real range. And certainly the first thing I do is just make them aware that access to work exists. Like I said earlier, it is definitely an unkept, a secret that not a lot of people know about. So it's really common that the employer doesn't either know about it, or they do know, they've heard of it, but they've not implemented it, or they've implemented it, but it's really just like one of the members in their team that's aware of it, or they've got it for like 2 or 3 employees. So we certainly raise awareness that it exists and pass on some information. And then we'd also encourage them to use it in the sense that a lot of employers that we work with, and rightly so, will try and offer things to people, but there is the option of just them contacting Access to Work. They do have advisors there to say, I'm looking for a reasonable adjustment. How can you help me? What's out on the market? What's available? So that's something we definitely work with employers to raise awareness from.
Okay. And could you, perhaps for colleagues in the room, because we've heard a couple of really great stories of individuals who've been supported, do you have an example of an individual that you can share with colleagues?
Yeah, we've got some really good partnerships with a variety of places, and I'll give you a good example of one individual. We've been doing a project with Devon Council, and we started working with a really small brewery in Devon, and essentially what it was a father to a young girl. She had a learning disability, and he wanted to set up a brewery to kind of employ people with learning disabilities. Really small, really niche, really inclusive environment to just learn those skills. So we started supporting some of those individuals, and it's a great place for someone to try get their foot in the door of that industry and go, this is not for me, but then it's also a great place for someone to go, I really like this is really interesting. So to be able to see people step their foot in and really like brewing and drinking alcohol, and then then start applying for just bigger breweries and just employing in much bigger places. So it's a real great stepping stone to a real sustainable place where they're working in a bit bigger corporation, basically. And the great thing is then they recycle the person that comes in, so it's kind of that.
What timing.
Thank you.
I don't know why, but I'm tempted to tap dance whenever there's a spotlight available. Can we have a massive round of applause, please, for our quizmaster and all of the participants? Okay, we are now going to do a woo clap. So if everyone get their phones out again, please. Now, I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to get the questions. Are they going to appear on there? Okay. If you've got any questions that you'd like to ask our panellists, please put them into woo clap now, and hopefully they'll appear on the big screen. Oh, okay. We've got a question. I can't see the rest of that. What are the biggest challenges you face with? What are the biggest challenges you face with participants or clients? Do you want to go for that one, Liz?
Okay. I want to pick up on your point about 24/7 support. We also have an app, and I do think it's that thing of we need to be available to people more of the time. And I think, we're all going to be looking at what artificial intelligence can do to support our clients. But I think there is that thing of how we can develop things ourselves so that we're available for them. So I think it's about how we can, in West London, I'm sure it's sort of everywhere now, there's like a no wrong door approach, is how do you get out there and get that support? Because it takes a village to support all the people that we're working with. It's not just us. So I think it's that idea of how we create that network of support so that people can develop all the things that they need, the skills, the confidence, the opportunity to work, and that they can get that 24/7.
Fab. Does anyone have anything to add on that? Wonderful. Any more questions? Okay. AutonoMe. Is your app easily accessible for participants if they would like to be referred?
Yes. So basically, people can either self-refer themselves, they can make their own referral. It's pretty simple through the website. And we provide we've got these mini posters, and some of the organisations we work with, we give them some posters and they put it in their staff room, basically, or put it on their intranet. The ability is, it's kind of the idea is trying to create kind of an inclusive environment where people can advocate for their own services, so they can refer themselves to service, and we'll pick that up and provide the support. And then, it works across all kind of Android and Apple devices. So the way I look at it is the app is like the blank slate, and then it's the knowledge of the team around kind of neurodiversity and learning disabilities that creates the strategy that is then input into the app. So it looks different for every person.
Great.
Could I just come in on that? Because I don't know if you're able to do this, but one of the things that we're going to do today is that just for Basecamp people, but if you've been to Basecamp, you can access our app. So there's some things around so that people can do that, because I think we just want people to be able to see how it works. So, but just for Basecamp. So if you're here today, please look at those things, and you're very welcome to have it for a year.
Great, thank you. You all mentioned supportive employers as key. Is there more that we can do all together to improve the pool of supportive businesses?
I think if we're talking about the recruitment of refugees, I think one of the things that would really help employers, particularly small businesses, SMEs, is helping people understand the right to work documentation and that process. I think a lot of the time there can be a bit of a fear amongst businesses about inadvertently breaking the law or hiring somebody that doesn't have a right to work. And I think that is our responsibility to hold employers' hands through that process and help people understand what what the process is, and that refugees do have a right to work, and also talk a bit about the benefits of doing that. But I think most of the hesitation we get from employers that don't want to engage are from a well-meaning place, just worried about inadvertently breaking the law.
I think it's about understanding employers' concerns and being able to push back and challenge them where we kind of know that those concerns are misfounded, and kind of operates across kind of lots of different aspects. But it is about challenging those employer misperceptions when they do exist, I think, to some extent.
Wow.
G4S, do you face many barriers from participants who have to engage with probation while on programme with yourselves?
So the model we run is a supply chain model, so we don't deliver direct participants. We've got lots of suppliers that do the front facing stuff for us, but I've been going out speaking to the suppliers around this exact topic, and to be fair, it's what I was touching on before with employees, understanding employers. That's one thing, but as far as Restart goes and our supply chain, we've got our guys are completely flexible. So if somebody comes in with a probation appointment, we understand that is a key factor in keeping them from going back to prison potentially. So support that as much as wherever we can. We'll support that, because that's fundamentally one of the biggest pieces of advice that we try and give to our advisors is create a relationship with the probation officer. Well, that's old money. I think the comms now, community offender managers. Create that relationship, because if you're working together, it's much easier to understand. We're talking about understanding the restrictions and licence conditions and stuff. Working alongside the probation officer is key. So forging that relationship with the probation officer, that the participant understands and gives consent that you're doing that. But forging that relationship has been a real big thing for us to get across.
Brilliant. Thank you. If unconscious bias is inherent to an individual, how do we work to eliminate it?
There are a number of kind of strategies for dealing with unconscious bias. The first one, as I kind of already alluded to, is to encourage people to take more time when they make decisions, because that's kind of the easiest way to get out of that automatic fixation. One of the other key things is to try and make decisions in groups, and in particular in diverse groups, because that's where you get the diversity of thought that's able to challenge those assumptions. That can be a struggle in small to medium-sized businesses, for example, especially micro businesses, as you alluded, like the mom and pop kind of thing. But especially in kind of bigger businesses, they should be having diverse teams make decisions instead of it just being down to one individual because I think as well, it's like there are many stages to that employment process where that bias can creep in, especially if it's just one person, whether that's vetting the CVs, choosing who to interview, conducting the interviews, and then ultimately choosing who to hire, and even potentially who to train, who to promote, etc. once you have employed someone. And so it's about kind of having as many people involved at every stage of that kind of decision-making process.
Fantastic, thank you. How can we challenge employers' mindset with regards to stigma around specific barriers, such as ex-offenders or disabilities? Want to take that one?
Yeah, I guess certainly for people with learning disabilities, we'll definitely talk about, the positives of that. But I think another thing we'll do is just understand the challenges that they have and that they are running a business and their perceptions, and just take them on board and basically reassure them that we have a thing that provides a solution to that, so it doesn't become a problem. So, for example, reasonable adjustments. There is no net definition of what a reasonable adjustment is, and that makes that hard in the eyes of the person advocating for it and then the employer providing it. So we would kind of sit in the middle and kind of explain to both what a reasonable adjustment would be in this scenario. So we're trying to alleviate the worries that they would have. Right. Oh, sorry, have you been there all the time holding cards up? I normally do ignore Scott most of the time, to be fair. Have we got time for one more? Yeah, one more. Yeah. Okay, how would you advise a single parent to approach an interview if the only role on the CV is parent?
So what we do is we encourage people to do stuff before they apply for a job. So do a course. Volunteer somewhere. You don't have to do it for that long, but get something at the top of your CV. We can also look at the transferable skills that people have, and lots of people have got things that they've done as a parent, but it's really, I think, about getting some stuff to the top of your CV so that people are looking at that and then not just looking at a gap.
Thank you. Okay, thanks very much to all of our panellists. We now get more refreshments, sponsored by Cognisoft. Well, hey, so if you can all be back in, please, for 2:45.